Let's kick off the presentation. I'll do that, and after that, if anyone has any questions, we'll be really happy to respond to them. So this is what we were looking at covering. Firstly, just to give a quick overview of the economy, and all of you are very familiar with that. As CV mentioned, to talk about our theme for the year, which we've had extensive discussions on, and leading with the theme, some of the underlying points of the theme, and then the various CII initiatives that we are planning to do this year, and also a lot of them are continuation. Always, whenever we have looked at the theme, developing the theme for CII, there's an element of what's current, what's more relevant, and also an element of continuity as we look at some of these things. So from an economy standpoint, we all know that there has been a very fundamental recalibration of global trade. And combine that, if you combine that with geopolitics, and that's happening, it's given rise to global uncertainty, which is probably almost unprecedented in the recent past. And uncertainty and business are generally not good friends. So I think that has an impact, and as we can see, that has an impact on the global output, which was almost 2.6, 2.7% increase in global output last year. And this year, the anticipation is that it will be negative. So I think we are in a world which is going through lots of change, lots of uncertainty, and that has ramifications not only on the Indian economy, but also significant ramifications on economies around the world, all significant economies around the world. In all this, if I was to look at India appears to be a steady hand in what I would say a very fractured global economic order. From all parameters, if we look at what's happening in India, the growth numbers are a testament to that. For the third year in succession, India will probably be the fastest growing major significant global economy. All macroeconomic parameters, if we look at, are holding up quite well, whether it's inflation, whether it's interest. I think some of the monetary policy decisions taken by the Reserve Bank of India really need to be appreciated. The health of the banking system is very strong. We have one of the lowest amount of NPAs. The GDP growth numbers that we saw last time had a good combination of growth in consumption, growth in investment. Fiscal deficits are trending down faster than what has been anticipated. There is growth both on the export side, import side, but in particular, growth in service exports has given much greater resilience to the currency, to the foreign exchange reserves that we have. That coupled with the remittances that we have has made the current account deficit almost negligible. So overall, you would say, if you look at the macroeconomic picture of India, and if you look at the individual areas of growth, I think it really gives a picture of very strong resilience. So apart from being amongst the fastest growing economies in the world, it also is probably in one of the strongest, most resilient position, which is really helpful when you are facing a very, very uncertain global order. So if you see what does this mean? So as we are seeing what's happening globally, I think there are 3 or 4 trends that are coming out very clearly, and I think India is also following on those trends. First is there is almost a race to enter FTAs. Globally, people are looking at economic partnerships mostly with friends, some because of a little bit of compulsion, but by and large, the trend for signing FTAs, economic cooperation, with people that they can deal with and where the interests are complementary. I think that's one big thing that's coming through. The second is competitiveness of economies. Individual economies has become very strong. So there is a massive push towards trying to see how ease of doing business, reforms in countries that don't have very friendly or have heavy hand of regulation. I think there is a lot of effort, a lot of work that's happening to change that. It's not an easy change, but that's happening. And third is supply chain resilience and focus on manufacturing. So if you actually see what has happened in the last 3 to 6 months, these are the big trends that are coming through. And I think from an Indian standpoint, I think India, if I look at the FTAs, we have been signing FTAs, but the ones that have taken a lot of time to negotiate, UK has got inked, EU we have made very good progress. I think India is dealing more with the non-tariff barriers in EU rather than the tariff barriers, and how those non-tariff barriers can be simplified. And in US, I think there is, we have a date. Most of the businesses, most of CII members are very keen that an agreement or an FTA or some tranche of an FTA gets signed, because people are wary of a tariff being imposed. And I think there is a reasonable sense of confidence that something may happen in the not too distant future. So I think those, from an FTA standpoint, engagement is going on very well. The second thing is that as we sign FTA, for a large part, and especially large part of the Western world, the tariffs are going to go down by almost 10 to 15%. So you will have Indian industry facing competitive intensity of a much higher order. And therefore the urgency to do reforms, the urgency to do business reforms, the urgency to enhance competitiveness is very, very high. And I think we are seeing much greater receptivity and openness in the government to look at ease of doing business, to try and see how they can focus on competitiveness. And there are two themes that are coming out very strongly. First is, obviously, India has to focus much more on manufacturing, particularly on advanced manufacturing, labor-intensive manufacturing. We'll cover some of this in some of the slides. We'll talk why it is so important for India to get there, and a lot of focus on that through PLI schemes and otherwise. And secondly, if India has to get on the next orbit of growth, and particularly because we have benefited immensely from the services sector, how AI impacts competitiveness in Indian industry, how AI impacts efficiency in the Indian economy, and how from an AI standpoint, how are we able to deal with those issues that are likely to come up going forward, whether it's around employment, competitiveness, and others. I think that's very, very important. So if you broadly look at the agenda from a CII standpoint, obviously there are lots of things that we engage with, but reforms and ease of doing business, manufacturing, and AI are the core themes which I think will define in many ways the long-term competitiveness of India. And I think there are a slew of other things which we'll discuss going forward. So CII does its, the research team in CII has built their growth model, and basically we have 34 high frequency indicators which start from demand, manufacturing, labor, money markets, financial markets, and as international things are becoming more and more relevant, it also starts to ingest in data about global uncertainty and everything. And based on that, there is an econometric model through which CII makes what we believe should be is likely to be India's growth. And from CII standpoint, we believe our growth should be in the range of 6.4 to 6.7%. It is not that different from the growth that has been projected by some of the other agencies. It's pretty much in the same zip code. There are obviously some risks to this growth. A lot of those risks are external risks, geopolitical risks, global trade related risks. But I think a lot of them have been factored in, and also there are some upsides. So hopefully they should get balanced out each other. So from a CII standpoint, we're looking at 6.4 to 6.7%, and it's been tested with our members, with the business community across. So as I said, these themes are obviously continuity of what we do, because you don't. That's what strengthens the institution, strengthens the engagement with government. But also there is an emphasis which is more relevant for the year and which is more pertinent to make a difference, and also to what government and us business stakeholders are looking at. So our theme is really to say how can we work towards accelerating competitiveness. This is both from an economy, country, member standpoint. And we think that there are 6 things that we really want to focus on. Obviously, as I said, the next generation reforms are very important. Manufacturing is very important, and I'll get into the details of each one of them. Technology and AI is another very important stream. Sustainability, energy transition, livelihoods, and for us, trust is very, very important, because the cornerstone for everything to happen, especially from a business standpoint, is how trust is developed between members, between business people, and trust is developed between government and business. And this is a two-way street. So for us to achieve, as a country, our full growth potential, there has to be much greater trust between business and industry and government. So let me start with reforms, and let me get into the some of the details on the next generation reforms. A lot of reforms that we are talking about now are generation 2 of reforms. A lot of these reforms are very minutiae, very detailed, because the high-level reforms have been done to a large extent, or the government has taken a stand on that. Now what is required is really level 2, level 3, which business, industry, particularly MSMEs, foreign investors face on a day-to-day basis. And a lot of our engagement with CII is really to get feedback from our members and try and see how we can relay that to the government, and in a constructive way, so that some of these things happen. I will start with fiscal reforms. Obviously, one of the concerns is the health of states, especially given the amount of welfare economics that is currently happening. So really having a control on that, or an oversight on that, through state fiscal councils, who can really independently assess the state of Indian economy, of the state's economy, as well as institutionalizing the credit rating system for states. So it actually effectively operates as a good governor in terms of what's happening, and that will also link to have an impact on the borrowing cost and what amount that states can borrow, what's the level of fiscal deficit that they can do. So that's one area. The second one, which I think CII and many others have been saying for a long time, given the state of capital markets today and given the government ownership, the government ownership today is in the markets is about 10% of our market cap. So our market cap is about 5.5 trillion. 10% of that is 550 billion. So almost 50 lakh crores is what the government owns today in terms of the current value of the shares that they're holding. It's important for the government to hold. Some of these sectors are sensitive, but even if the government was to take 10% of this out, i.e. 5 lakh crore, and if we look at almost all corporates, if I look at foreign investors, they're all trying to see how they can recycle their capital better, how they can deploy their, either raising capital or selling stocks, to say how they can redeploy. I think the government, our strong request to government has been that they should be much more proactive on this. These are capital markets of a lifetime that we are seeing, and if the government can monetize and use this to much better effect and much better purpose, either to some extent reducing debt, but more importantly, in trying to see if we can create a sovereign wealth fund which is focused on MSMEs, a sovereign wealth fund that is focused on addressing the critical issues that the economy is facing, especially in terms of rare earth and some critical supply chain dependencies. I think that's very, very important. The second thing is just easing compliances. So if you're looking at setting up a hospital which has a diagnostic center and a pharmacy, you almost need 400 approvals for that. If you're looking at setting up a metals manufacturing facility, almost 150 to 175 approvals for that. And in some ways, that's also delaying and slowing down the capex, the speed at which private capex can go down. So we've tried to look at obviously both horizontal and vertical. So industry by industry, what are the things that can happen, that can be done to reduce the number of approvals? Obviously, a lot of these approvals happen at a state level, not at the central level. And also try and look at vertically. So if you look at, if, for example, environmental clearances, compliances take a long time. So if there is a unified framework, there are 5 streams under which environmental clearances are taken, whether it's air, water, waste management, forests, and other. If they can all be combined and they can be a uniform piece that can be created, that will be much better. If all the state approvals can be consolidated in Pravesh 2.0. And then there are small little things. If you're getting an approval, you compare this to globally. India's approvals are for the shortest time frame. So depending on the risk factors of the industry, instead of giving an approval for 2 years, can you give it for 5 years? And there can be some compliances that can be given. Likewise on non-polluting industries, for example, an IT industry, if their space they've occupied is more than 20,000 square meters, then you have to take approval. Can it be a much more simplified process by which this approval can be taken? Industrial parks that are already approved, all the units in the industrial parks, do they require approval? So likewise, and on NOCs also, if you can break this into 4, NOCs that are not required should be taken off. Those NOCs that require objective assessment, they can be automated. Those NOCs which require certification can be rely on third-party certification, credible third-party certification, and have a time-bound basis on which some of the NOCs can be achieved. So as I said, a lot of this is detailed. Again, approval timelines, digitally tracking them, mandating them through legislation, dispute resolution and decriminalization, especially the Jan Vishwas 2.0 has to come, and on technical and procedural violations, at least the criminal pieces should be taken away, and in court, commercial court infrastructure also has to be expanded. On the tax, and particularly I would say on GST 2.0, GST has been really a big boon for India in the way it's integrated India, the way it's formalized the sectors that were not formal earlier. But I think it's time to look at GST 2.0. One, I think the rate simplification has to happen, and specifically those rates which get into the products that are consumed from an income standpoint by the bottom 20-30% of India. I think there the rates have to be rationalized. And I do hope that the government takes action. I know there is, there have been a lot of representations that have been made. Also, if we can make a more simpler 3-tier structure, I think that will help a lot in boosting consumption and also giving greater relief to the people who are in the lower income strata. Because right now, in some cases, the amount of GST really makes it very, very expensive and throttles consumption. Income tax, the tax credit, input tax credit, GST was set up so that there is no cascading effect, but there are many areas where there is cascading effect, and how those input tax credits can be taken away, and those which are not covered within the remit of GST, whether it is petroleum, electricity, real estate, whether they can be brought in. On audits, and this I would say especially for MSMEs and others, if you are operating in 4 states, 10 states, 12 states, you need to get audited in the main, obviously in the center, but also in the, so the same piece has to get audited or assessed in 10 or 12 different locations. And people are free to raise the issues, a number of issues they want to raise, how they want to raise, what they want to raise. So our representation to the government has been that please just have audit at one place. And if you're a large company which is not an MSME, have one state to take a lead role. And then whatever audit findings that are there of that state should be implemented across all the states. So that's something that we've been recommending. Likewise on direct taxes, one of the biggest issue, the government is coming up with a new income tax bill. He has made the recommendation. I hope they do get implemented. The other is reducing tax litigation. One of the biggest issues is tax litigation. We have some alternative dispute resolution mechanisms. Some of them are effective, but not as effective as they should be. They need to be dealt with, whether it's APAs, whether it's Bureau of Advanced Ruling, and I think other dispute resolution schemes need to be introduced so that the amount that gets into disputes can really be reduced. And we have made recommendations to the government that as soon as an assessment is done, if there is a dispute, is there an arbitration, is there a mechanism that can be done where those disputes can be resolved? And a lot of the issues that people, SSCs face can be reduced there. And also on the biggest clogging is happening at the Commissioner of Income Tax appeal side. And I think that can be strengthened, and that's another area that needs to look at. So that is the on ease of doing business. If I look at manufacturing, so the first frame that we were looking at was, how do we look at reforms? And I said a lot of these reforms are now in the detailing. They are the procedural aspects which really create a lot of hurdles. The second area where we are really making a lot of policy recommendations and also working a lot with our members is to say how do we make India a bigger manufacturer? How can there be greater gross value added in India? So if you look at it, roughly China's gross value added, this is for 23, global gross value added is about 17 trillion. China's gross value added is close to 28%, and India is 2.8%. And that gap, India has to accelerate that gap. And also, if you look at our trade deficit with China, over the last 3 years, 4 years, it's pretty much in the 95 to 105 billion. Yes, the quality of trade deficit is changing. Earlier, a lot of it was raw materials. Now, a lot of it is more finished goods, semi-finished goods. And that's one area that we are looking at. And also, India's share of manufacturing GDP is almost stagnant, if not marginally declining over the last few years. So, I think there is, if you look at this, if you look at what's happening in the world, if you look at gross value added, if you look at India's total GDP composition and manufacturing as that, I think that's one area that we need to work hard on. So the policy suggestions, a lot of it is to encourage advanced manufacturing, a lot of it is to encourage labor-intensive manufacturing. We talked through some of them. The PLI schemes have been launched. Total amount allocated in PLI schemes is about 3 lakh crores. That 3 lakh crores has to be spent over a period of 5 to 6 crores. Out of that, only 30,000 crores till now has been spent. So in the 18 PLI schemes that we have, roughly 30,000 crores have been dispersed. And I think we need to ensure that these PLI schemes actually become effective, become implemented. So one of the things we want to work with government is how do you make the PLI schemes effective? In some industries like electronics, drones, semiconductors, to some extent in pharmaceuticals, they've been very effective. But in a lot of the other sectors, there is a lot of work that needs to be done. So I think that plus the R&D piece is very critical. I think the clarification and the circular that the government came up with got approved by cabinet yesterday. I think that's really a massive allocation of 1 lakh crore. We do hope and pushing government that it gets implemented quickly, that they appoint the agencies that are going to disburse them, and that disbursement happens on an interest-free basis or very, very low interest. Because if they charge high interest, or if the time spent is more than the effectiveness or efficacy of that scheme will not be there. So we have identified what are the areas from a manufacturing standpoint how India can be more competitive. Obviously, factory reforms are very important. Land, power, logistics, efficiency in labor, and land being one of the biggest issues. How we can get greater pools of land available, so if we integrate at the state level. There are almost when you go to a state, where land has been allocated, divided in 30, 40 different parts. This land can be used for 30. They can be consolidated into 4 or 5 parts, so you don't have to apply for conversion every time. Even agricultural land which can be converted for industrial use should be earmarked earlier. The industrial park scheme that was launched through the budget, I think if that can be accelerated, the industrial parks, plug-and-play parks that have been allocated, if those information can be made distributed more publicly, then people can start seeing, because when we talk, and especially for MSMEs and also for larger, for the foreign investors who are looking at coming in, getting land is becoming one big challenge, obviously at a reasonable price. Land is available, but at a reasonable price. Even if you look at FSIs across states, it varies for industry. For the same industry, in some state the FSI could be 1.5, and in some state the FSI could be 4. So is there a way that we can optimize the FSI for all the states, keep it at 4 depending on the industry that it is in, just to ensure that land, which is one critical area, gets sorted. A lot of land is parked with public sector enterprises, with PSUs, and I think that needs to be, that also needs to be, find ways of using that, especially if India wants to get converted and wants to become a manufacturing industry. Cost of power is another area. Transmission infrastructure has to be accelerated, especially as we have more renewable coming through. Distribution, whether it's privatization of state level distribution units, whether it is listing of some of those units, whether it's providing more open access, whether it's doing the franchise way, but that is a bottleneck today. And some states have gone through it. We know UP is going through it right now. And I think this has to be done across, because of cross subsidization, the cost of manufacturing is higher. So that's something that we are going to the government to try and see. So distribution and accelerating the transmission grid is very critical to ensure that cost of, and providing open access, that the cost of power comes down. It has come down over the last few years, but for India to be manufacturally competitive, this is very important. Logistics, again, we've been leading, the Minister, Honorable Minister, Mr. Gadkari has been talking a lot about it. India's logistics costs have been coming down, but still 4 to 5% difference between where India is today and where China is. And a lot of investments are happening on the road side, likewise on dedicated freight corridors. There is one between Delhi and Mumbai, but we should be looking at some of the other DFCs that can be built to try and see how logistics costs can be reduced, especially from a railways standpoint. Supply chains and global value chains, I think we have a template. Electronics has been one of our greatest success stories from a manufacturing standpoint in the last 2 to 3 years. And if you look at the anchor point of that, it was the PLI scheme, but also we invited Apple, which is one of the largest players, and their entire ecosystem to come to India, work with them closely, ensure the bottlenecks that were there were removed. Likewise, in key industries, whether it's aerospace and defense, whether it's footwear, whether it's garments, especially those which are labor-intensive industries. If we can get the key players, and CII has been working with NITI and others to try and see how do we get the key players in, so that the manufacturing, and then bring them in and manufacturing can happen. And once the key player comes in, then the entire ecosystem and value addition develops. So if I look at Nike today, Nike sources almost 50% of their products from Indonesia. Almost 20-25% of balance comes from China, and maybe 1 to 2% comes from India. There's no reason why India's share in that should be higher. And the same is true for garments, for clothes, and everything else. So I think that's something that we need to do. The second area is to see how do we build more resilient supply chains. We're seeing the example of magnets, but if we look at industry by industry, for example, air conditioner as an industry, India will be one of the largest manufacturers of air conditioners, but we don't make the most critical component, compressors. We have to create a PLI scheme. We are working with the government to say PLI scheme, technology partnership, whatever support that's required, that India should build their own compressor ecosystem. Because again, we are dependent on a few countries who are the key critical suppliers for those compressors. So working on some of those, and whether it's through PLIs, whether it's through ability gap funding, and that's why the importance of a sovereign wealth fund, because some of these things can be there. FTAs we've already talked about, and CBAM is a big issue that Indian industry is facing, especially as we look at the EU FTA, and I think CII has made recommendations to the government and has put a business case to say how it should not be used as a non-tariff barrier, where Indian industry gets disadvantaged. The National Manufacturing Mission is a great example. of, because the next level of manufacturing competitiveness will come how center, state, various ministries of center, various state come together, look at the industry, try and see how they can resolve the issues. And I think to that extent, it can be made a much more action-oriented body rather than the advisory body. It also becomes a platform where industry can engage with various stakeholders, which is because issues are not related to one industry. And also for advanced manufacturing, which is very critical. If we can have another subgroup, I think that will be very, very critical. But this is a great example and something that CII has been recommending, that like GST, like naturally, we have to create platforms where stakeholders from different ministries of center, stakeholders from state can come together and resolve issues going forward. MSMEs we've talked about. There's a self-reliant fund that was created in 2019, about 10,000 crores, which was being handled by the MSME. It's hardly been utilized. SIDBI, MSME, and SBI caps and everything. So, we need to double down on this. MSMEs need capital, MSMEs need scale, MSMEs need technology, MSMEs need R&D, and to the extent that the new R&D scheme that's come out, I think will be very helpful for MSMEs, but they need capital today. And I think that's why this creation of these funds and ensuring that there's deployment that happens and things that are stuck up for various reasons are unlocked. So we are representing to the MSME ministry to try and see how some of these things can be unlocked so that the money can be utilized for more productive purposes. Again, we've talked about R&D on minerals. So coal has been a great example of how production has increased. And one of the reasons why that spurred it was instead of giving first an exploitative license, EL, and then a mining license, the government actually issued comprehensive license. So in many categories of minerals, the government needs to start looking at trying to see how you can issue comprehensive license right up front. Because the whole thing is, instead of taking 5, 6, 7 years, this can be done in 12 months, 18 months, and private sector is willing to participate. It has a massive impact on competitiveness. On rare earth, obviously, CII has a separate council. We're engaging with the government to try and see, because there is sensitivity, there is radioactivity in some of the products, but how government with the controls, in partnership with the industry, how can we build resilience so that one after the other we don't get caught up in products. We're now seeing that one after the other there will be things that are slowing down the growth of manufacturing in India, and I think therefore the resilience in supply chain is very critical. Labor, what we are telling states is the critical elements of labor code need to be now implemented in states. If they can't implement in the full scale, at least create specific industrial parks where some of these labor things can be implemented, and especially for labor-intensive manufacturing, if we can ensure that we have more female labor participation, the laws that are required to enable greater female labor participation is very, very critical. And in electronics, we are seeing factories that have 70%, 80%, 100%. In garments, likewise, very high female labor. So the laws that are required, whether it's in terms of timing, whether it's creating hostels, whether it's having crashes, I think all those are critical and have to be embedded, but a lot of this has to happen at a state level. So we talked about reforms, we talked about what CII is pushing from the manufacturing standpoint. The third area is AI, technology and AI. And there are 3 or 4 elements. One is obviously the broader National AI Authority that can be created, which looks at AI holistically. We are now clearly seeing that in many industries, CII has done an analysis, for example, in technology industry. If you can break up the jobs into 1,200 odd different jobs, the entire industry in 1,200 jobs, almost 50 to 60% of them will get impacted by AI, i.e. they will become much more efficient. In some cases, they can be replaced. So how can India become more competitive? Through AI, I think that's very critical. The second piece is, I think it's very clear that the government has done a tremendous job of now actually saying India should be building its own LLMs. They are providing the funding. I think they've already funded 4 to 5 national scale, large scale LLM, and work is happening there. and also taking chips from NVIDIA to accelerate that. So that piece, and from a policy standpoint, how that can be accelerated. From a CII standpoint, we are wanting to take, especially to our members, how can they be using AI better. We've also created our own COE to take to MSMEs and also for scaling. Scaling will be a very, very important part, and how can industry, government and other agencies work on the scaling side. The government has talked about creating 4 or 5 COEs, accelerate, ensuring that those COEs get accelerated, and ensuring that India continues to be the global capital, use case capital for AI. So the GCC and everything else, and how we can accelerate. The other issue, there is clearly AI will have an impact on the different quality of jobs. So, how the job market evolves, changes, I think that's very, very critical from an AI standpoint. And at least our view is that the government and industry need to work very actively to see how we can create much better skilling so that the new jobs can be taken up, how newer areas like tourism and others can be developed, and we'll talk something about that, right? But it is time that in the next 2 to 3 years, AI, and especially in the younger blue-collar area, AI will start having an impact on jobs, and how we can deal with that proactively will be very, very critical. On energy transition, given AI, usage of AI, data centers, as the per capita consumption grows, the energy consumption, per capita consumption in India will grow significantly. But India, to be successful, has to have a much lower carbon intensity growth. And for that, the focus on energy transition is very important. I think we have a great success story in solar, but also looking at other alternatives like nuclear going forward. And I think there's a lot of impetus from a government. So amending laws that are required to make nuclear energy, especially the small modular reactors, more effective. I think that will be very important. Secondly, the various solar supply chain, solar generation, then storage, whether that storage is in terms of battery storage, pump hydro, the evolution of hydrogen, the PLIs in hydrogen. So ensuring that irrespective of the noise in the world on sustainability, that India continues its path on energy transition, and there also the center and state need to work in a very coordinated fashion. The delay in PPAs that are happening, how do we ensure that those delays, we talked about the transmission grid being developed at a very accelerated rate, that's very, very important. On air pollution, CII has made its very detailed recommendations to various agencies, to the new state government as well, and we're hoping that some of them will get implemented, especially in Delhi and also in some of the other cities. That's an area we are working on water resources, I think, and other areas on how do we play a more active role on the conservation of that. And I think it's becoming clear that climate change will have an impact on agriculture, climate change will have an impact on inflation. And therefore, one is dealing with those issues, but I think the agenda that CII really wants to drive hard is on adaptation. Because adaptation is where this will have the greatest impact. And I think CII, through its various center of excellences and also through the various groups, is trying to focus more and more on adaptation to ensure that the impact of climate change on agriculture, on crops, on inflation is mitigated. Livelihoods, and I touched a little bit on this, but let me start with agriculture, because I think a large part of India is still engaged in agriculture, and we've had as we call it, a 3P approach on agriculture, which is focused on productivity, preservation, and profitability of agriculture. So all our policies are trying to address one of the 3 things. I think there have been some areas which have become very, very important, critical. I think the entire value addition, whether it's through food processing industry, whether it's through specified crops, I think that's an area that we're focusing on. I think India needs to be setting up a cold chain network Similar to container cooperation, I think we're recommending that we build a cold chain, recommend a cold chain corporation that's created for setting up cold chains around. And also, if I look at the Warehousing Corporation of India, some of the warehouses are so old that the FSI can be better utilized, they can be made much more modern, they can be utilized much more effectively. And the entire FPOs, we have 20,000 FPOs. That's been a great experiment. We need to be trying to see how the FPOs can be increased. We're recommending to government the interest cost that the FPOs have to bear, that has to be reduced. The mandi tax that the FPOs have to pay, they have to be reduced. So I think on the agricultural side, that's a big focus for us. In tourism, I think both for manufacturing and tourism, I think the re-emphasis on brand India and how CII can reactivate the brand equity fund is very, very critical. And secondly, some states have done it, given the industry status to tourism, but some states have to do that, and that really helps in tourism becoming more competitive by reducing the cost, whether it's the power cost, whether it's some of the other interest costs and others, and I think that's an area that CII has made recommendations to Ministry of External Affairs and Ministry of Commerce on the entire overseas employment. This requires a partnership at a G2G level. This requires on a language side how we can skill our people in different languages. So CII has been working especially with the government of Japan in skilling on the Japanese language, and then people being available and the third is skilling, and then the G2G relationships and building the supply pool for that is very critical. And our view is, even in many cases, in many of these families, even if one person can go for 2 to 3 years, so that it doesn't create a lot of times people are worried in different countries that if people are there and move for a longer time, it creates a dissonance in the society. But even if they are there for 3 to 5 years and are able to come back, the impact on the economy, the impact on the families, the impact of upgrading of skills in India is very high. I mean, India gets almost 120 billion dollars on inward remittances, and if that has to grow, I think we need to be encouraging this and a very, very strong way of upskilling as well. The other pieces of skilling, and I think one of the big mismatches that industry today is facing is on availability of skilled manpower. So the recommendations that we have made to the government is that demand assessment has to be much more robust, much more stronger, of what kind of skills are required, what is the demand for that. Second is the demand varies from region to region. So if in Tamil Nadu we are building the EV ecosystem to a large extent, then can we have more people who are trained and specialized on EVs and skilled on EVs in Tamil Nadu? In Gujarat is building big semiconductors, then can we ensure that we get more skilling or semiconductors professionals in Gujarat? So I think there is a regional element to this as well as we look at build skilling. Then when we are doing PLI schemes for these skills and advanced skills, can we ensure that the pedagogy for this is developed? Can there be better industry participation along with government to ensure that the investments that are required and the pedagogy development that happens is done? And finally, I think the crowding in for skilling infrastructure, the capital, whether it's from private sector, government, CSR funds, needs to be done. This is, if India has to accelerate in manufacturing, it's a bit like water everywhere, but nowhere to drink, nothing to drink. So there is a lot of people available, but today one of the things that is hindering private sector capex growth is also because companies who are really wanting to accelerate at rapid pace, if you ask them, one of the biggest challenges is availability of skilled talent. And I think that's something that, and the ELI scheme that's been brought in, I think is very good. The internship scheme that is there, I think CII is trying to see how that internship scheme can be made more effective. The CII members are very actively participating in the internship scheme, which will really enable on-the-job skilling. So these are some of the CII initiatives that we are looking at launching this year. Some of these are existing initiatives, and you will see them. A lot of what we have talked about, where CII, one is obviously making policy recommendations, engaging with our members, getting the feedback from members and making the policy recommendations, but also creating institutes, committees to do that. So the Multi-Skilling Training Institute for CII, where we are working actively on the ground to ensure that skilled talent, manpower is available, and I think really looking at accelerating that from 7 million to 30 million or the model career centers have been very successful. We've set up some recently, even in some cities, and they've worked very well, and I think there is an acceleration on that. MSMEs, I did talk about AI and what we are doing on the AI side. We've launched a center of excellence for AI. And the other new initiatives that CII is working on is around sustainability. I think the CII's sustainability initiatives, the green initiatives that we're doing, trying to educate our members, trying to see how we can, for them to adopt sustainability. Again, working on energy transition, specifically on hydrogen. We talked about the FPO, and obviously the trust is extremely, as I talked about, is an article of faith for CII, is extremely important, and critical members we've already talked about. Thank you. So this is sort of a quick overview of what we are looking at from our agenda for CII. Some of it is in continuation and some what we are focusing on. So open for
Come, Vivek. Thank you, Rajiv, for such a very detailed presentation, and I'm sure we can go on for question answers, but we'll take a few, and of course, during the next few days and few hours, you will talk to many offline too. But I'll start with a small correction. I had said 30th June instead of 30th May of your day, of your start date. Ruchi, you wanted to start off. You've got a mic here, please, quickly. Ruchi from PTI.
Sir, Ruchi from PTI. Congratulations on taking over as the new president. You mentioned 6.4 to 6.7 for FY27. What's the outlook for the current fiscal? And you mentioned geopolitical uncertainty as a downside risk. Any other potential downside risks that you've identified that could drag down economic growth? And the slowdown expected in major economies like the US and China, could that also have a spillover effect on India's economic growth? Thank you.
Can we take a couple of questions and then probably pull up? That will save us on time. Karishma? This is today. Yeah.
Congratulations, Karishma on this side. Your appointment comes at a very crucial time where, of course, the US and Indian officials are currently in Washington trying to seal the deal, hopefully. While there is optimism, there is some kind of apprehension that there could be a deadlock or a tough stance by India when it comes to the agriculture and dairy sector. Your comments on this as you're the voice of the industry?
Three at a time, Rajiv, okay? 2 at a time is enough to
let me start with yours, and then so I think the Indian industry's view has been very clear. When we've engaged with CII members, I think we are not looking forward to a 25% tariff. It's not just a tariff; it's also relative competitiveness with other countries. And I think that's very important. So I think we are looking forward to it. As all of you, we are really not aware of what the details are. But I do know that the level of preparation that the Ministry of Commerce has done, and the engagement that they have had with industry, the engagement that they have had with various ministries, including the Ministry of Agriculture, has been very detailed. So I feel very confident that that they understand the challenges that Indian industry and particularly some sectors which you mentioned, agriculture and dairy have, and those will be adequately addressed. And also from an industry standpoint, there are issues and concerns that have been raised and they will be addressed. But we must remember that in all these things you will not have 100% winners. You will always have an 80-20, 70-50, whatever that number is. And we know that US is negotiating several trade deals at the same time. So there is some competitive tension there as well. So I think as long as we get a balanced, fair, reasonable FTA, and we also believe that this FTA will be done in tranches. So it will not be one. I think it will probably be done in phases, and those areas which are more tricky, which require more consultation with stakeholders, have greater political ramifications, may be dealt with later on. So that's what I would think. I think I would say that we are hopeful the way that the current government has prepared gives a lot of comfort. Yeah. That's right. That's you say perfect cannot be the enemy of the good. Absolutely right. The second area which you mentioned is on so when we're saying 6.4 to 6.7%, we are referring to this fiscal year. That's what our goal is. And you're absolutely right. I think internally, as I said, India is very resilient, very strong, and yes, there are external factors, whether they are relating to complete rebalancing of global trade and geopolitics. And that can have an impact. And we've seen that the US economy had a tough first quarter, but one is hoping that things will pick up. Europe is between 1.5%. So, but I would say that if you look at India's first quarter, I mean, we don't have the GDP numbers, but the general consensus estimate is India will be closer to about 6.5% in that range, GDP in the first quarter. And if you could, my sense is that probably, unless something that we don't expect happens, from a global world trade standpoint, this is probably one of the most uncertain 3 to 4 months. And hopefully, once the first tranche of the deals get signed, things will settle in, and hopefully, the US markets will also start rebounding back. And that'll happen. I think the bullishness in the stock market also is very clear. The second area is on geopolitics. I think there also we're now seeing a lot that is happening in the first quarter, and still India has been able to hold to 6.5%. So I do hope that we've seen a lot of concentrated, challenging external action in the first quarter, and hopefully in the second, third, fourth quarter things will get more steadier. And then if you back it up with the interest rate reduction that has happened, the CRR release that has happened, the liquidity that's there in the system, we are all anticipating a good monsoon, urban demand. We are hoping, and some of the issues that some of the circulars that whether they came out on R&D or on ELI schemes, if government accelerates the path in some of these areas and also accelerates the path of reforms. I mean, it's clear that India needs to get into the next orbit of growth. We have to look at acceleration. And if the government gets onto that journey, I'm hopeful that we should be at the upper end of the growth estimate that we have.
So you're saying 6.5 for the current fiscal or 6.7?
No, we said we gave a range of 6.4 to 6.7%.
Yeah, Satish, you wanted to ask.
सर एक सर मैं शैलेश हूँ ENI से। एक तो सर कैबिनेट ने अभी ELI अप्रूव करी है, वो किस तरह से आप देखते हैं कि मैन्युफैक्चरिंग और जॉब ग्रोथ को बढ़ाएगा वो? और दूसरा, अब RBI के रेट कट की बात आप कर रहे थे, तो क्या बैंक जो हैं वो रेट कट इंडस्ट्री और कंज्यूमर को पास ऑन कर रहे हैं?
हाँ, तो आपका पहला सवाल शैलेश, जो ELI स्कीम गवर्नमेंट ने बजट में अनाउंस किया था और उसके बाद अभी वो डिटेलिंग की उन्होंने सर्कुलर की, तो मेरे ख्याल से उसका फ़ायदा ज़रूर है। और उसका फायदा सिर्फ मैन्युफैक्चरिंग को नहीं, वो राइट अक्रॉस है। उन्होंने बोला मैन्युफैक्चरिंग में बेनिफिट वो 4 साल तक का देगा, बाकी सेक्टर्स में वो 2 साल तक का देगा। तो उसका बेनिफिट तो सबको होगा और डायरेक्ट इंसेंटिव है। तो अगर कोई हायर करने की सोच रहा है, उसको ये पॉजिटिव नज है कि आप हायर कर लो, तो आप, और खासकर आप उस श्रेणी में हायर करो कि आपकी आमदनी 1 लाख रुपए से नीचे है और आप फर्स्ट जॉब में हो, या आप इवन सेकेंड जॉब में और आपकी आमदनी अगर 12 लाख रुपए प्रति वर्ष से कम है, तो आपको वो बेनिफिट मिलेगा। तो बड़ा फोकस्ड है कि यंग बच्चे जो आ रहे हैं उनको लाना, उनको फिर रीस्किलिंग करना, उनको नए जॉब देना, उसको बहुत फोकस्ड है। तो ये है तो अच्छा बेनिफिट मेरे ख्याल से ऑलरेडी दिखने लग गया है। जो आपको मैं दूसरे सवाल का जवाब दूँ, उसका ट्रांसमिशन इम्पैक्ट बेनिफिट दिखने लग गया है। आजकल क्या होता है कि कई सारे रेट्स भी फ्लोटिंग रेट्स होते हैं, तो जैसे ही RBI गिराती है वो अपने आप उसका डाउनवर्ड प्रेशर आता है, तो वो उसका इम्पैक्ट आने लग गया है। और बैंक्स की भी अवस्था बड़ी अच्छी है, निम्स बड़े अच्छे हैं, रिटर्न बड़े अच्छे हैं, क्रेडिट ग्रोथ भी ठीक है, उतनी अच्छी नहीं है जितना वो उम्मीद कर रहे थे, फिर भी 10% की क्रेडिट ग्रोथ है। तो अगर आप उसके हिसाब से देखें तो वो ट्रांसमिशन इम्पैक्ट अगर 100% नहीं आए तो 70-80% उसका ट्रांसमिशन इम्पैक्ट आ जाता है और आने लग गया है। और आस्ते आस्ते RBI भी बहुत इस चीज़ में कि अगर हम बेनिफिट दे रहे हैं तो वो भी बड़े गौर से देखती है, और RBI का जो रेगुलेटरी मैकेनिज्म है बहुत स्ट्रॉन्ग है कि वो बेनिफिट एक्चुअली नीचे जा रहा है।
Thanks, Rajiv. Alisha, Bloomberg.
Thank you. And congratulations, Mr. Vimani. Wish you a year of fruitful engagements ahead. You spent some time talking about securing rare earth supplies for the country. We've heard concerns from the auto sector by now, but are you also getting any escalations from other areas, electronics, renewable energy, just yet? And if so, is there engagement that India is doing bilaterally with China to address some of these problems?
So yeah, definitely auto is a big concern, and we have not only on EVs but sort of wider. In some other sectors there are concerns, and in auto I would say the concern is more serious than what's come out till now. In fact, some of the most conservative companies are already starting to give some guidance on lowering their production levels going forward. So definitely there is a worry, concern, much more in auto, in some other sectors as well, but I think it's much more predominant in auto. I'm not aware of any G2G engagement with China. I'm not aware. The government is then certainly not aware. But what the government is, as you heard today also, from a Quad standpoint, I think they're getting together to try and see how they can address this rare earth issue. Personally, if you ask me, it's a good wake-up call, I think, for India, that we should not only for rare earth, but for all those areas, whether it is APIs, whether it's penicillin, whether it's other products, we should really look at which are the products where we have critical supply chain dependencies, and we should be having a strategy for that. Obviously, we should have good geopolitical relationships right across, but still, I think having such a weakness can impact in critical junctures, can impact our.
Thank you. Just a quick follow-up then. While domestic manufacturing will obviously take some time to take place, are we sort of opening up our stance on imports in the meantime to ensure there's continuity in production?
Yeah, I don't think there's any restriction on that. Question is that even globally some of these items are now so concentrated in one country, and that's a challenge. But as you may have read, I think Japan is also importing some of the minerals from India. They're processing it. I think there is some conversation, some discussion that is happening there amongst Japanese companies and private sector companies in India. And the government is also engaging with private sector companies in India. I mean, this is not an immediate solution, but more medium-term solution to say how can we look at setting up manufacturing in rare earth and processing of rare earth. And that's why I also said that the mining policy, because some of these items are radioactive, so they come under the Department of Atomic Energy, and they're very sensitive items. So how do you actually build a policy that takes care of security and other issues, but one can accelerate?
Yeah, please go ahead. Sorry.
Vimani sir, I'm Himanshu from NDTV India. एक सवाल था जीएसटी को लेके, आपने बहुत ही महत्वपूर्ण सुझाव रखा है, इट इज़ टाइम फॉर जीएसटी 2.0। आपने रेट रैशनलाइजेशन की बात की है, इसके पीछे क्या सोच है, किस तरह के बदलाव की ज़रूरत होगी आपको लगता है, और क्या सरकार के सामने भी आपने जीएसटी रेट में बदलाव का कोई सुझाव रखा है?
हाँ, नहीं हिमांशु जी, CII की तरफ से हम लोग ने काफ़ी इंगेजमेंट किए, और अब हम लोग ये चाहते हैं कि हम इंगेजमेंट स्टेट लेवल पे भी करें, क्योंकि सिर्फ सेंटर का मुद्दा नहीं है, इसमें स्टेट को भी एक साथ आना पड़ेगा। और हम लोग का ये मानना है कि इंडिया की इकोनॉमिक ग्रोथ के लिए उनका जो इनकम लेवल का जो बॉटम 30% है, 40% है, जबकि जब तक उसके हाथ में ज़्यादा इकोनॉमिक पावर नहीं आएगा, चाहे वो मैन्युफैक्चरिंग हो, चाहे वो कंजम्पशन हो, चाहे कुछ भी हो, वो सस्टेन्ड ग्रोथ नहीं है। तो इसको लेकर जो हम लोग ने जीएसटी 2.0 में दो तरह के सुझाव दिए हैं। एक सुझाव ये दिया है कि रेट रैशनलाइजेशन करें, खासकर वहाँ रेट रैशनलाइजेशन करें जहाँ पे वो प्रोडक्ट्स लोअर इनकम सेगमेंट्स में ज़्यादा कंज्यूम होते हैं। कई प्रोडक्ट्स जो 28% पे हैं उनको भी कम करना चाहिए, क्योंकि वो काफ़ी लोगों की कंजम्पशन होती है। इससे सीमेंट है 28% है, बट आज कहीं भी घर बनता है, कैसे भी बनता है, उसमें सीमेंट की कंजम्पशन होती है, उससे कॉस्ट कम हो सकता है काफ़ी। और हम लोग का ये मानना है कि इससे इकोनॉमिक एक्टिविटी जो बढ़ेगी, क्योंकि आज अगर आदमी को 100 रुपये खर्च करने को है, वो अगर वो उससे 10 चीज़ नहीं खरीद कर 12 चीज़ खरीदता है, गवर्नमेंट के हाथ में वो किटी, चाहे वो डायरेक्ट टैक्स या इनडायरेक्ट टैक्स के रूप में आए, वो उतना ही होगी। हो सकता है टाइम लगे वो 6 महीने 12 महीने का, बट उतना होगा। तो एक तो ये है। दूसरा ये है कि प्रोसीजरल ईज बहुत ज़रूरी है। तो दूसरी चीज़ जो हमने जीएसटी 2.0 में बोली है वो प्रोसीजरल ईज के लिए, कि आज जीएसटी इसलिए बनी थी कि आप पे कैस्केडिंग टैक्स नहीं हो, पर अभी भी कैस्केडिंग टैक्स है। तो अगर आप जैसे फैक्ट्री की बिल्डिंग बना रहे हैं और उसमें जो जीएसटी लगता है, उसका जो इनपुट क्रेडिट है वो आपको नहीं मिलता है, तो हम लोग गवर्नमेंट को बोल रहे हैं इससे कॉस्ट बढ़ता है, कम्पिटिटिवनेस में फर्क पड़ता है, रिफंड्स वगैरह मिलने में समय लगेगा। तो एक तो वो सारा है कि इनपुट टैक्स क्रेडिट को कैसे सिंप्लीफाई किया जाए, और दूसरा जो हम लोगों ने बोला है कि जो ऑडिट्स हैं, जो आप इनकम टैक्स में असेसमेंट्स कहते हैं, जीएसटी में ऑडिट कहते हैं, जो ऑडिट होता है वो सेंटर भी करती है और हर एक स्टेट में भी उसका ऑडिट होता है, और उसके बाद कई अलग अलग तरह के इन्वेस्टिगेशन होते हैं। तो हम लोगों ने बोला है कि एक तो आप एक बार खासकर एमएसएमईज के लिए तो सिर्फ एक ही जगह असेसमेंट करवाइए, जो शायद थोड़ी बड़ी कंपनियां हैं उनका एक सेंटर और एक स्टेट में आप असेसमेंट ऑडिट करवाइए, कि और बाकी स्टेट उसको फॉलो कर सकते हैं। और तीसरा ये, अगर जो लीगल केसेस होते हैं, आज मैं वही केस 10 जगह लड़ रहा हूँ, उसकी जगह एक नेशनल एपीलेट ट्राइब्यूनल होकर अगर बन जाए एक जगह, तो वही चीज़ मेरे को 10 या 12 जगह नहीं लड़नी पड़े। तो ये जो सिंप्लीफिकेशन की जो चीज़ें हैं वो कई सजेस्ट की हैं। फॉर्म्स में कैसे सिंप्लीफाई किया जा सकता है, खासकर एमएसएमईज के लिए। और गवर्नमेंट काफ़ी डिटेल में समझ रही है, कई चीज़ों के रेवेन्यू इम्प्लीकेशन भी होते हैं, तो वो भी उनको देखना होगा, क्योंकि स्टेट्स इन्वॉल्व हैं, तो स्टेट्स को भी रेवेन्यू इम्पैक्ट होता है, सिर्फ सेंटर का रेवेन्यू इम्पैक्ट नहीं है, तो वो देखना है। पर हमारा ये मानना है कि कुछ ना कुछ जीएसटी में रिडक्शन की उम्मीद है, और उससे ज़्यादा सिंप्लीफिकेशन की वो बहुत ज़रूरी है, कि उससे ईज ऑफ डूइंग बिजनेस में बहुत फर्क पड़े।
और इसी से जुड़ा एक छोटा सवाल था, पेट्रोलियम के बारे में आपने फिर से वो सवाल उठाया है, पेट्रोलियम प्रोडक्ट्स को जीएसटी के दायरे में शामिल करने का आपने कहा है, इलेक्ट्रिसिटी को भी शामिल करने के बारे में
रियल एस्टेट इलेक्ट्रिसिटी
ये कितना महत्वपूर्ण है, क्योंकि इसके पहले मैं देखा लखनऊ में जो जीएसटी की बैठक हुई थी उसमें आम राय नहीं बन पाई थी, क्योंकि राज्य सरकार इसके लिए तैयार नहीं। तो आपको लगता है नए सिरे से एक राष्ट्रीय सहमति बनाने की फिर से ज़रूरत होगी?
हाँ बिल्कुल है, क्योंकि इससे कॉस्ट बढ़ रहा है, और इसमें जैसे अगर जब जीएसटी का प्रावधान आया था, उस वक्त जैसे सेंटर ने हर एक स्टेट के साथ बैठकर अगर तीनों चीज़ एक साथ नहीं, तो एक चीज़ को अंदर डालें, क्योंकि हो क्या रहा है कि अब कंपेटिटिव आप जैसे जैसे ड्यूटी घटा रहे हैं, इंडिया को अगर मैन्युफैक्चरिंग कंपेटिटिवनेस चाहिए, आपने देखा हम लोग का ग्रॉस वैल्यू एट 2.8-2.9% है। अगर हम लोग को अपना कॉस्ट बेस कंपेटिटिव रखना है, तो कस्टम्स ड्यूटी रिड्यूस करनी पड़ेगी, आपकी इकोनॉमी और ओपन अप होगी। अगर आपका कॉस्ट स्ट्रक्चर लीन नहीं होता है, और जीएसटी इज अ वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट कंपोनेंट ऑफ दैट, तो competitiveness पे ज़रूर असर पड़ेगा और MSMEs को बहुत ज़्यादा फर्क पड़ेगा। तो इसीलिए ये चर्चा ज़रूर होनी चाहिए, पर इसके लिए पॉलिटिकल कंसेंसस चाहिए, बिकॉज सेंटर को तो इसमें कोई इशू नहीं है, इसमें इशू तो ज़्यादा करके स्टेट्स को है। तो इसमें पॉलिटिकल कंसेंसस चाहिए और इकोनॉमिक बैलेंसिंग किस तरीके से हो कि आप 3 साल 4 साल 5 साल के लिए ट्यूशन प्रोवाइड कर सकें, तो वो अच्छा रहेगा।
We'll take two actually, which is already on the line, Shiva from Business Standard as well as Saksham from Times of India. I'll come to the others also.
Sir, you talked about labor reforms, so they were one of the key agendas of the government as well, and Center did come up with 4 labor codes. But with delay in implementation, is there a signal from the central government to the industry that it's the states who are going to carry the mantle of the labor reforms now, and the new central labor codes are going to take a backseat? What is your assessment and the industry's assessment of the same? Because then it opens other issues as well, like what happens to the central sphere, what happens to the industries that operate there, and what happens in case there is a dispute between central and state laws. And another question, sir, regarding the situation in Foxconn, where China has called its 1,000 employees and it blocks supplies of items like rare earths and boring tunnel machines and other items. So again, what is the industry's assessment of that?
ये हाँ, तो जो फर्स्ट इशू on labor codes and as central give, I don't think the center has given any signal. But a lot of this implementation, if you look at the central labor code, a lot of this, it's a concurrent subject. So a lot of the implementation has to happen at the state level. And what we are doing, and I think also that is the genesis of the next level of reforms and ease of doing business, a lot of that will happen at a state level. In fact, next week, we are calling all our state councils for a day to have, spending 7-8 hours to go through some of these issues in greater level of detail. But I think, I would say some states are very progressive. They are looking at trying to see how they can be more competitive. And some of those states are trying to see how they implement some parts of this, either right across the state or in industrial parks and industrial clusters where they can implement some of it. Especially when we are looking at labor-intensive manufacturing. I think for India, labor-intensive manufacturing is very, very important because one is India's competitiveness there is much more longer, much greater there. Technology or AI is unlikely to disrupt that in the short term. Electronics is a great example of that. And the second is, as India's science and new FTAs, the disadvantage that it had with some of the countries, other countries, will go away. And India itself is a big market. So I think states realize that. So land reforms, labor reforms to facilitate this. So we are not being told by anyone, but we are just taking a more pragmatic approach as CII to engage much more effectively with states. And we have a very strong, as you are aware, a very strong setup in each of the states. And that's where we are very engaged. On this, the second area that we are looking at, which you talked about, was Foxconn and other issues. That will happen. That is part of. I think these things are very layered. Actually, it's very difficult for us to find out. What is the trigger? It's a bit like homeopathic medicine. You don't know where the trigger is and where the pain is. So you have to do root cause analysis to say why this was triggered. Generally, if you see when things happen around the Quad meeting, something or the other happens. If you look at the history of all this, when a Quad meeting is happening, there is some action that we see from some countries on some countries. And there are messages, in a way there is a way to message some of these things. And so I think, I would say it is a global reality that India and all the other countries need to wake up to that. If you have manufacturing and resources very concentrated in a few countries, you would run the risk of some of these. Yeah. So the other area on labor code and other, so I think one big focus area for us is to say, how do we create greater value add in India? And how do we ensure that there are greater engagement of skilled people? And for that, obviously, labor codes have to be easy. Manufacturing is very important. But services also is very important, and some sectors, particularly services like tourism, is very, very important. And I think that's one area where we think India, on the visa side, I think from what I understand now, things have become much better. I was in Africa 3 weeks back in South Africa. I was talking to my colleagues, and they said they had one of the best experiences in getting e-visas as they've experienced anywhere else. So I think that piece, I think India is getting the e-visa piece, getting visa quickly is getting sorted out. Then you have the logistics of coming in, the cost structures, and the availability of resources. I think that is something that India needs to work on, and also on this, how we can get more skilled people, more labor who are actively, effectively engaged in doing that.
We'll go to Saksham from CII and then also Meghna from Money Control.
Good afternoon, sir. First of all, I'd like to congratulate you on getting this coveted position. So my question is, I was recently in ICI Bhavan, and they too are investing heavily in GCCs, Global Capability Centers, and you spoke on that. So I just wanted to know, will you be willing to partner with other industry bodies? CII will be willing to partner with other industry bodies, and what are your plans for Global Capability Centers, positioning India as a hub for GCCs?
I didn't understand.
Can you come?
Of course.
So, ICI?
ICAI,
Okay.
the Chartered Accountant.
Okay.
So they are positioning themselves, they're positioning us Indian CAs in as global CAs that can help financial systems globally. So are you willing to partner with them in this sector and all?
And I know your question, but are you asking me my capacity is required or CII? As CII, we always partner with everyone. I mean, I think this is, as CII, all sectors, ICI is an important partner for CII, especially for MSMEs, also various programs. And anything to support anything that's good for Indian economy. I think that is something fundamentally, I think there is no reason not to do it. And GCCs have been a very strong reason why India's service exports are resilient. And what happens is that when you have your critical talent located in a country, and today GCCs, when people are coming, they are not coming to save costs. They are not coming to just look at their back office functions. They are actually coming for scaling. They are actually coming for the quality of talent that India has. And I think that adds sort of value, creates employment, gives foreign currency, and you become much more central in the global scheme of things. Especially as AI comes in, innovation comes in, I think it becomes very interesting. And we have, this year we have also, as CII, as we was pointing out, we are starting a GCC council, so some of the leading GCCs we are getting them together, and we are interfacing with various arms of government along with them, try and see how GCCs, if they have any issues, how they can be addressed.
Meghna?
Hi, sir. So you spoke about the huge mismatch between skilling and the industry requirements. That is a big issue. How is the PM internship scheme being taken in by the industry, and do you think it will solve the problem or much more needed from the government?
No, I think the PM internship scheme, the government is pushing very hard. Industry is very keen. CI has been a very active stakeholder in that. Lots of members of CI have stepped in and everything else. It's not, I don't think there is one arrow that's going to solve this problem. I think there have to be multiple issues that have to be solved. There has to be very strong partnership between government and industry on this. And as we look at schemes when they come up, these are very novel schemes, very innovative schemes. Sometimes they require some tweaking on the sides to make them more effective. So I think we will go through a process of iteration so that it becomes more and more effective. But what I would say is that industry is very key. It's a very novel, it's a very innovative scheme. I think how do we ensure that there is enough people, youngsters who are excited about this and willing to participate in this scheme, because it can open tremendous opportunities. I think it's a scheme that we very heavily recommend it, and I think it's one of the most innovative schemes.
And we're working on this with Indian companies, the first 500 and beyond, and explaining to industry as to how it can actually leverage it, or rather get a pipeline of people to be interns, and also seeing to it how we can counsel the interns to really choose and how to choose. So there are portals where CII is involved and working very closely with the government on this. Yeah, so sorry, two, I mean, no, at the end and then, yeah.
Good afternoon, Sunny Verma from ET Prime. So last year we saw that corporate India raised a record almost more than $60 billion in external loans, ECBs. Now in India rates are coming down. This year do you expect domestic credit to pick up, or what could be the reasons for, as you said, moderate credit growth despite transmission happening? So those two questions if you can address.
Yeah, I mean, I do believe that credit will pick up, and I can answer your question in maybe 2 or 3 parts. The difference between the US Treasury bill rate and the 10-year GSEC rate is probably at its lowest today. It's never been as low as it is today. At the end of the day, it's a corporate call that people will take. I think I have seen much more wider views on dollar than I've ever seen before on where dollar will go. So I think a lot of people will take their individual calls, which way to go. Secondly, I would say that there is general reluctance towards credit. People are much more cautious now before they decide to take loan. There will be credit growth, but I do believe that given we have a very buoyant capital market, that the growth will probably be, I'm talking of corporate